My grandfather and my father had both told me to be caring for what we used to, what was, I can simply call our great mother, an easiest description. And we never had much word for the forest. It was sort of like the all to us. And we would say, when you, Grandpa used to say, when you go up there, you be quiet and you sit and you don't think, and you will eventually, after you may be called meditate up there enough, you will be transformed. You'll be either, you'll have something flow into you or you flow out. Much, much like Buddhist thought, I suppose. And so that was our philosophy regarding the woods. And that was actually the structure of our values, is being at peace and letting go and letting the great mother, Grandpa told me, he says, you don't think up there, you just let go everything, and then you come home and you will know what to do, what to say, and how to. And tradition says, our great mother supplies everything we need, but we have to take only what we need.
Yeah, I was almost getting a little emotional there. It does take it all out of you. And you're phoning at a point when I think a lot of us are finding how far we can be stretched. Yeah, it's good to hear from another person who's been through it. And yeah, thank you for that. And we'll keep on fighting as long as we can here. We're still here ultimately, and we're being tested, and they got through today, but we haven't left. So we got a couple tricks up our sleeves yet. And if anybody ends up following us or you end up checking back in, I'm sure you'll see that we don't have our tail between our legs just yet. Thanks for this interview. And yeah, it's good to hear from a comrade. And God, I, yeah, I'm grateful for, yeah, anyone who's standing up for the natural world right now when it feels like the roof is caving in on all of us.
Welcome to Truth and Reckoning, a broadcast from CELDF. In this show, we'll learn from frontline organizers and communities fighting against environmental destruction. We'll explore different perspectives and innovative strategies for movement building, the potency and the potential of rights of nature, and effective action in defense of our communities. And we'll share inspiring stories of people working towards right relationship with the land and each other. I am your host, Max Wilbert. Today we're bringing you a very special pair of interviews with two men, Elder Bill Jones, an 85-year-old man from the Pacheedaht First Nation of what's now southwestern Vancouver Island in British Columbia, Canada, and Will O'Connell, who's a 34-year-old science and math teacher who has played a key role in ongoing protests against the logging of old-growth forests in the Walbrand Valley and Fairy Creek areas of Vancouver Island. On the day before we recorded this interview, Monday, December 8th, Will was wrongfully arrested by the RCMP, the Canadian Federal Police, while he was on site at a protest camp in the Walbrand Valley. Loggers had been able to pass the camp, past the ongoing blockades that on the day we recorded this had been up for 110 days, and start to log these ancient forests again. Towering 2,000-year-old western red cedar trees, ancient firs and hemlocks in a lush biodiverse forest home to black bears, goshawk, coho salmon, steelhead, marbled murrelets, and countless other species. More than a dozen people have been arrested at the Walbran over the past week or so, with more on the front lines and risking arrest every day. They need support. So if you are in the region, if you have friends or allies in the Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Pacific Northwest region, please go to this place if you can. Be there on the front lines. And if not, there is a fight like this happening somewhere near you. So first, we're going to hear from Will, who's going to outline what's happening right now on the ground. He joins us from his car at the protest camp on the front lines. He's exhausted, he's tired, he's soaking wet, and he's still not giving up. He's fighting, putting his body on the line, getting arrested repeatedly, trying to defend this incredible sacred place. Then we hear from Elder Bill Jones, who grew up in this area very nearby, who worked as a logger for many, many years. And he tells us of remembering what he was told by his elders, who taught him that we have to defend these forests, that we have to stand up and stand with them. And he has played a key role in both Fairy Creek and now the Walbran by lending his moral authority and ethical weight to these fights, by speaking up in the media, in public, to people at these camps on the front lines and telling them why this is important, why it is better and more right to stand against the destruction of these forests and violate the law than to go along with what an unjust law tells us to do. For those who aren't aware, Fairy Creek, which kicked off, I believe, in 2020, was the largest act of civil disobedience in Canadian history. Over several months, more than 1,100 people were arrested for blocking these forest roads, and they achieved some wins. Some of the forest that they were protecting has since been logged, but other parts of it have been protected, at least temporarily. So this is a very important set of interviews. Once again, it's a real honor and privilege to bring you the voices of these two powerful, very well-spoken, and morally courageous people. And I hope that their words and their actions will inspire you as much as they have inspired me. I'm here with Will O'Connell. Will is joining us from the front lines of the Walbran Valley, where folks have been mobilizing to protect old growth forests. I started following the Fairy Creek situation a number of years ago, and then when I saw this new forest defense campaign emerge this summer, I was excited to see it. So could you just tell us a little bit about who you are and your background, and then, really, what is the Walbran Valley and why are you guys there to protect it?
Well, that might be the last time you speak if you ask me all those questions at once. Yeah, my name's Will O'Connell. I'm a math and science teacher, but I'm also someone who's been kind of part of grassroots organizing around Fairy Creek and with an organization called the Friends of Carmanah Walbran in the past, building trails and advocating for our last ancient forests. And this valley that I'm in is on Pacheedaht territory. So it's about 3 hours north of Victoria on Vancouver Island. And it's a really special valley. It's called the best of what's left, usually because it's a forest of kind of a grandeur that you don't expect to see anymore. And if you do, it's kind of decisions have been made. Like you either see 12-foot across trees in a park or you see 12-foot across stumps. And right now we've got a lot of 12-foot across cedars that are standing, that are at jeopardy of being logged. So we started a blockade to stop the logging of the Upper Walbran Valley, I think 110 days ago now, and it's been a continuous occupation. Today is the first day they've been able to fall trees. So it's the end of our successful stop of them logging that old growth.
Okay, wow. Sad day then. I'm sorry that I reached you on this day. I mean, I'm sorry that that's happening overall. It's insanity because, I mean, these are Western red cedar trees, so if they're 12 foot across, I grew up in Washington State, so grew up with a Western red cedar in the backyard that was 4 feet across and was probably 75 years old. So these tree, and of course the diameter growth gets slower as the tree gets larger. So these trees are probably 1,000+ years old, right?
Yeah, these are really truly ancient forests, and yeah, in the heart of the wall brand, those trees are well over 1,000, approaching 2,000 years old for sure.
Okay. So I spoke with Elder Bill Jones, who I know has been out there with you folks for the last couple years and has been in some ways sort of a spokesperson for the movement and for the trees. Could you tell us a little bit more just for folks who aren't from the region? Like I said, I'm from Seattle, but we have folks listening from all over the world. What is really at stake here?
Yeah, well, um, to speak just a bit about Elder Bill is that he's really, I guess, just an enlightened man. He's one of like a rare few people that you'll meet and um kind of attribute wisdom to, and uh yeah, he's a spiritual guide for a lot of people, and for good reason, because he's someone um who you can tell it just his like being is in alignment. He's one of those people that is calm and is caring, and really brings a consistent love to things, but also has a lot of strength in his conviction around wanting to protect the last of the old growth on his territory. And so in many ways, we're kind of the arms and limbs or whatever. We are the kind of the force behind his desire to protect that old growth, because he is the one who's saying, "Come to my territory, defend my last ancient stands," because he's in and out of hospital these days and can't always be out at camp. So he's a wonderful man, and recently the cops denied him access. We had made him a spiritual cabin out of the land that wasn't blocking the road. We Anyhow, it was a camp for him to come so he could come up to the Wallbrand and be back in his ancient forest. And the cops denied him from going there in a way that wasn't just denying him access to his land. They also denied him the truth, which was that they had burnt down his cabin hours ago, and they kind of talked around it and pretended they were going to let him in, and never did it, in a very disrespectful way. So um yeah, we're here on his behalf, and we're not going to stop fighting, especially when he's being disrespected on his own territory.
So we're already talking about the RCMP, which is the federal police in Canada. So tell us a little bit about what they've been doing. I know that they've been raiding camps over recent days, arresting people. What's the RCMP situation today, and how's that been ramping up over the past couple months? Because I know a logging company got an injunction against you guys from a court, right? And so that's what's
Yeah,
led to
so
RCMP.
exactly. So I'm sure it sounds like you're familiar with this process, but for the people listening, it's kind of like you can go block a logging road, and the police kind of don't want to go out there. Like, if you block a city road, they'll charge you with criminal risk mischief right away. But to get the cops to come and, like, you know, on force, come out to the woods, the logging company has to get what's called an injunction. And so a judge will grant this injunction that says, okay, the courts have now declared a bunch of things. Mostly what they declare is that you can't block the logging roads out here. And so when the court declares you can't block the logging roads, then if you block those logging roads, you're held in contempt of court. And that's what we're being charged with. But it basically says, the court says, okay, police, it's time for you to go out there and enforce. And in recent years in BC, this has been a new development. They've created an off branch of the RCMP, which used to be called SERG. They changed the acronym, but I don't really care. And they're this tactical force that wears kind of camo outfits and drives quads and has helicopters, and so they're kind of a mosaic. There's three types of cops that are out here. There's the green guys, we call them, and they're the ones who are lurking in the bushes trying to like sneak up on you and get to the thing that somebody's trying to go in a tree set. They're trying to get to the base of the tree first and cut the rope so you can't climb up. Or they're trying to like grab you in the woods when you're just trying to, film your friend. And then There's the blue guys, which are just normal officers, but within that, there's an extraction team who are kind of problem solvers. And so there's this riddle battle going on between us and them where we're trying to make devices they can't figure out and can't remove, and they're trying to figure them out. And then there's the gray team, which is the police liaison team, who are there to just talk to us, but don't really have any power and are basically there to placate you and calm you down or to try to extract information from you, but don't actually have the ability to grant any of your requests. So it's kind of like just talking to a side of this thing. And that's what the police force looks like. And lately they've been coming in really heavy. They showed up with 22 vehicles to start the raid, and then they had 8 vehicles staying overnight, including a helicopter and number of pieces of heavy machinery, 2 excavators, a lift, and uh, a side by side, everything. They have drones. They came in 22 police vehicles in a giant convoy with everything they could to just hit us with incredible force.
So I know one of the tactics that I've seen on social media is the cantilever. So somebody
Uh-huh.
suspended from a bridge blocking a logging road. Was that person removed in the last couple days? And
Yeah,
what
they were removed
tactics did they
yesterday.
use? Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's incredible is that these tactical police seem to just be allowed to do things that you really would not think like are just so beyond the type of like work safe thing that you see on a day to day. And so to paint a picture, this cantilever is it's a bridge that we're trying to block. So this is one of the riddles, right? We are like, how do you put a person in a block so that the cops can't kind of figure it out? And truthfully, it takes a lot of understanding of physics on our side and on their side. And so this one is we put a log across this bridge and we counterweighted it so that it extended off the bridge and there was a platform dangling over the edge of this bridge about 60 feet up, I would have said 40 to 60 feet up above a pretty dry riverbed. So it's a death defying thing to climb out. I remember the first morning somebody climbed out, they sat on the railing as the light was coming up, and it's just a really powerful moment because you don't know really, like you think you know that it's good, but you don't know, like it's just one tree and it could break, and you try to put safeties in place, but you just don't know. And so somebody was in it yesterday and dangling off the edge, and the zoom boom doesn't go down far enough. So they loaded a cop into the bucket of an excavator and reached it over the edge of this bridge and basically grabbed the guy out uh, and hauled him into an excavator bucket. But because they're like, the platform is well down, the bucket is way extended out over the bridge. And as they hauled him, they grabbed him and he kind of was slipping, which meant he kicked the platform away. There's this big gap that formed between the bucket and the platform as they grabbed him and pulled him into the excavator. But yeah, just kind of a wild like a wild thing to risk that person's life just to pull them out. But yeah, that's what happened to the cantilever in the end, is that they just literally scooped him out with an excavator.
Okay. And so, I mean, it's in one way, it's not surprising because if these people are willing to, in terms of the loggers, they're willing to cut down these ancient trees, which are sacred beings, in my view.
Yeah.
Destabilize the climate, destroy watersheds, destroy salmon habitat, all of
Mhm.
these types of impacts, then endangering the life of a protester is kind of uh, you know, to them, I'm sure
Yes.
their only real consideration is the public relations blowback that would be negative if they did hurt or kill somebody, right?
Yeah, and you see that there, um, well, what happens is the truth is the law doesn't really deal with us because if you want to take this one civil charge, it's not a criminal charge. It's not that big of a charge for us. Like people will go to jail for it if you're in the right contraption for a few days. But people, you know, and if it was one person doing this movement, like if it was one person who just went and said, enough logging this old growth, then it would be over. You wouldn't need 40 cops. You would just have one person show up, and a cop would show up and arrest them, and they'd leave, and that would be it. But when there's this huge outcry, this public outcry about our last ancient forests, and you start getting numbers, we've got a dozen so far, but numbers that are climbing of people who are just willing to take that charge, the cops can't really, if it's not, if we are intending to break the law, then they just that's all they can throw at us is go, okay, you're breaking the law, we'll be arrested. But they're playing into our hands, and we're ready to fight this out. And so you see them going above a little bit, like you know they arrested me yesterday totally unlawfully and held me for an hour in the rain, handcuffed, and then released me because they eventually admitted after spending an hour that it was unlawful to arrest me. And they come up to our camp and harass us, and they endanger people's lives, like that bucket incident, when really that person, you know, it's not worth endangering their life, scooping them out with an excavator. You should just wait. Like, you should just wait. They don't have very much food. It's pouring rain. Just wait and then arrest them, because the nature of this task force and the nature of our resilience, they are kind of forced to these extreme measures, which are an abuse of their powers.
So I'm here in the United States. I'm in Oregon, and there's been in the past a very strong forest defense movement here in the Pacific Northwest that I know there's been cross-pollination across the border with the movement in BC. So, tactically speaking, I'm not asking you to divulge trade secrets, but in terms of stuff that's already been done or that the cops have seen or that was used at Fairy Creek or so on, what tactics have you guys found to be useful out there? I've got the Earth First Direct Action Manual on my shelf right next to me here.
Sweet.
And what can forest defenders learn from Fairy Creek and from now what's happening there in the Walbrand?
Nice. Well, I'm wondering, like, what type of actions there. I know a lot about our history of the war in the woods, but I don't know as much about Oregon. Have there been kind of mass arrests, civil disobedience there? And it's for like some of your great fir forests, maybe, because I know there's some stunning forests in there.
Yeah,
Can I ask you
absolutely.
that? Can I turn the question around on you here?
There have been mass actions, and largely they kind of petered out in the late 90s, early 2000s in the wake of what we call down here the Green Scare, where the government went after these animal rights and environmental movements, in a heavy-duty way in the aftermath of 9/11.
Whoa. Yeah, using the terrorist designations.
Exactly. But through the late 80s, through the late 90s into the early 2000s, there was a very strong forest defense movement across this region. There were dozens and probably hundreds of road blockades and actions, tree sits to defend forests. One of the most well-known is what was known as the Cascadia Free State, which was a road occupation at a place called Warner Creek, just up the road from where I live, and people did things very similar to what I've seen from you folks up there, building semi-permanent walls across these logging roads using scrap wood and lumber from, previous logging operations, and building defensible structures and sort of defense in depth along these roads with multiple layers of tree sits and cantilevers and people locking down into barrels and tripods and bipods and then, monopods and different techniques like this as the techniques, as the tactic escalated. And I was just doing some writing yesterday about how, these techniques were in a sense very defensive, right? They were always getting taken down. The tree sits were always, the folks were always getting arrested, almost always. Some made it away. But it was part of a broader political movement. And one thing that led to was the establishment of what's called the roadless rule in the United States, which protected nearly 60 million acres of roadless forest from basically all logging and road building activity. And now the Trump administration is working to dismantle that.
Oof.
So, of course, there's an interplay, which I know you guys know up there, between sort of what's happening in the political realm in terms of policy and what grassroots movements are doing on the ground that is shifting the Overton window, shifting the conversation, and building political pressure to actually change something about what's happening there. I'm sort of distrustful of that because these are like colonial, extractive oriented economies and political systems. And yet, that's what we've seen to some extent be effective over the longer term, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much there. Yeah. I mean, to start, you're saying all the words like in terms of the mechanisms that we're using, like monopod, bipod, tripod, or whatever. That's exactly it. It's like these techniques are pretty universal. We've had some European land defenders come out and they're like, oh, monopod, and it's like they're putting them on the streets of wherever they were from the Netherlands, and we're out here putting them on a logging road. And and I think, well, the thing about it is, yeah, the movement, our history is very similar with these big movements in the late 80s and early 90s, and there's kind of these two roads you could go down, and one of our most successful ones, the Clayoquot Sound protest, was just mass arrest. They would let the logging go, but every morning they would lie on the bridge. And it wasn't about um it wasn't about these what we call hard blocks where people try to make it so that they actually hold the road and prevent the logging for the day. And so there's that direction. And then there was exactly what we're doing now, which is that in 1991, actually June of 1991, exactly when I was born, the fight was happening here in the Walbrand Valley, and it looked exactly like what we're doing. I think what's perfect is there's a place called Cantilever Canyon a little farther into the valley where you always drive by and see this notch where they cut out a notch in one of the logs that just sits next to the road in order to make this amazing cantilever of this huge cliff. And it's famous. And so we spray painted the side of a bridge, and somebody went in a cantilever up higher in the valley 34 years later. And the other thing you're speaking to is, yeah, like there seems to be this thing that, yeah, people like, God, I used to forest firefight, and when a fire when a fire has a window, an island of forest left in it, it's a forest fire is never supposed to look like a donut. Like it always fills in. It always creeps in. It always wants to take that. So if you make that donut hole around a town, it's like impossible to guard because every flank wants to close in. And it's like just hearing this, talking about this, yeah, my dad is leaving. He's waving goodbye to me here and interrupting the thought, which is only half formed. But it feels like it's like this pocket that you want for every single value other than logging. And it's like the system wants to take it. The system wants to close that hole. It wants to complete the final cutting of the old growth. And to see Trump trying to peel things back right where, well, exactly, our forestry minister, Ravi Parmar, just suggested that we should be logging, he calls it stewarding our old growth management areas better and allow cutting in our old growth management areas, which is essentially going to put an end to that system, which is what was designed to protect all our old growth.
We're both getting distracted because my neighbor's telling me that their goats got out and I need to go help them put them in. But, I just want to say, I know I should let you go, Will, but I really appreciate what you're doing out there. I co-founded a mining resistance group at a place called Thacker Pass on northern Paiute territory in what's now Nevada to fight a lithium mine, and spent, over a year living there, living out of my car, protesting the construction of that mine, taking direct action repeatedly, and building coalition, building awareness of what's happening out there. So I just want you to know I understand how much dedication it takes to be there on the front lines, and how grueling it can be to simply do what you're doing and show up over and over again. I want to give all my respect and recognition to you and all the people who are out there. I know at Fairy Creek, at least, there were thousands of people who were coming out. I know it's a rainy, wet, cold time of year up there, but I hope that more and more people will come out. I'm going to be working to spread awareness of what's happening up there through this interview. We'll be sharing this to all my contacts in BC and elsewhere. And yeah, thank you very much. I would just really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I was almost getting a little emotional there. It does take it all out of you. And you're phoning at a point when I think a lot of us are finding how far we can be stretched. And so yeah, it's good to hear from another person who's been through it, and that thank you for that. And we'll keep on fighting as long as we can here. So yeah, we're still here ultimately, and we're being tested, and they got through today, but we haven't left. So we got a couple tricks up our sleeves yet. And if anybody ends up following us, or you end up checking back in, I'm sure you'll see that we don't have our tail between our legs just yet. Thanks for this interview. And yeah, it's good to hear from a comrade. I'm grateful for anyone who's standing up for the natural world right now when it feels like the roof is caving in on all of us. So
yeah, all of us who do this work are intimately familiar with that feeling. Again, sending all my solidarity, respect, love to all you out there on the front lines. Keep your head up, keep fighting. We'll be sending whatever support we can muster your way, letting people know, encouraging people to get out there, to donate, to spread the word, to raise awareness, to build political pressure, and most importantly, to take action, whether they're there, and can join you, or are somewhere else, because this is happening everywhere. It's not with 1,000-year-old, 2,000-year-old cedars everywhere, but no matter where you live in the world, some sort of ecological devastation like this is unfortunately happening very close to you. And so that's one of the perhaps silver linings in everything being so messed up, is that there's opportunities for people to intervene in beautiful ways all around the world. And we need that. We need a lot more of it.
Once upon a time, we had 57 million hectares of old growth. About 4.5 million are away in parks, and about 4.5 million are too small or too inaccessible to be worth logging as well. Let's see where we're at now. We're down to 11.1 million. We're down here. And look where that green bar went. 48 million available hectares to log to 2. That's where we're at today. And the government is using this lack of old growth to say, oh, well, if you compare it to how much is protected or never going to be logged, we actually have 80% protection. They're taking this tiny amount of old growth left, and as it gets smaller and smaller, the percentage that's protected grows and grows. And so they're able to use their logging of old growth in order to convince the public they're protecting it.
I was denied access to my religious and spiritual practice place up at the Wallbrand. My private property there was burnt down either by the RCMP or the industry, as we call it. And I feel that now we must reclaim what we know is ours. The government is training Canadians to pretend they don't belong, that the Crown owns it all, and that is not true. When you love a land, when you serve your great mother, our great mother is yours and you are hers, and her land is yours, and you have rights and privileges and freedoms to go into your land and enjoy what you need to do and preserve and care for our great mother. Actually, that's what my dad ordered me to do. He said, "Sonny, when you go to your great mother, you be quiet. You listen to your great mother. You do what she says, and you say please and thank you to whatever she provides you, and you look after her. We are the care persons and custodians of our great mother, whereas the Canadian government, the Crown, and the industry, and even my Pacheedaht First Nation government are all hell-bent in pillaging our great mother. We must now be active and immediately go into action and do what we need to do to preserve what we know will never be replaced in current culture and civilization. This is the last of everything, and we have to save it. Tlako, tlako, tramat, tramatle.
Is everyone filming?
Yeah.
That's good. You're under detention, investigative detention. You're under
What am I under arrest for? Am I free to go?
You're not.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you today?
Not too bad. Thanks, Max.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me today. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's good. Nice to spread the word.
Yeah. So I've been talking with folks up there since Fairy Creek happened. I actually was friends with Joshua before that started and was talking to him when that began back in, was that 2020 or 2021?
Something like that, yeah.
So I've been seeing your name and seeing the videos of you out there at camp, speaking to people, speaking to the media, and the words that you've written. So I haven't met you yet until now, but I'm really appreciative of you and have been seeing what you've been doing for these years. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm still at it. We haven't finished the court cases with the Fairy Creek struggle yet.
Mm-hmm.
And yesterday, from what I was told, the outfit called Teal Cedar, who are suing me, or Teal Jones, whatever it is, they're Teal Cedar's hearing for continuing their court case against us was supposed to be heard yesterday, and see if they go ahead on it or not, because they're in receivership, and maybe the receiver's the boss now. I don't know.
Okay.
And but anyway, but I haven't heard anything from my lawyer, Ben Izzet, and it's a waiting game again, as usual.
Yeah. Well, it's something that we have in common. I was actually involved in defending a mountain in what's now Northern Nevada, traditional Paiute territory down here in the United States, starting around 2021 and going for a couple years. And myself and a number of different land defenders got sued by the mining company as well. So I'm familiar a little bit with the situation that you're in there, and it's not fun.
Yes.
But I'm knowing something about you and the words that you have spoken before on video and elsewhere. It seems like you're somebody who has a different set of values, and you're not too concerned about that type of thing compared to the destruction of these old forests in your backyard, basically, right? Close to where you're.
Yeah, right. Just 15 minutes from my house at that time. I gave the house away now, moved into a retirement home in a little village closer to Victoria, Souk.
Yeah. I lived in Bellingham for a number of years, and I grew up in Seattle, so just across the water from you guys.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So, would you mind for people who maybe don't have the background of who you are and where you're from and how you got involved in this? Like, it seems like you've had these values for a long time. What values were you raised with, and how did you get involved in supporting and being involved in this forest
Yeah.
defense?
Well, it was kind of I lived neglecting my um traditional values of my people. Being a logger, quite a good part of my life, I was like all loggers, drinking too much, and we were tough guys and all that stuff. And I think that was nice. Now looking back, I realize it was a system of denial so that we can bury what we know is in our deep conscience. And then about 12, I was asked to accompany a group up to Walbrand, who you may have heard of through Joshua. And I started getting involved there. And then I started realizing that my grandfather and my father had both told me to be caring for what we used to, what was, I can simply call our great mother, an easiest description. And we never had much word for the forest. It was sort of like the all to us. And we would say, when you go, Grandpa used to say, when you go up there, you be quiet and you sit and you don't think, and you will eventually, after you may be called meditate up there enough, you will be transformed. You'll be either, you'll have something flow into you or you flow out. Much like Buddhist thought, I suppose. And so that was our philosophy regarding the woods. And that was actually the structure of our values is being at peace and letting go and letting the great mother. Pappy told me, says, you don't think up there, you just let go everything, and then you come home and you will know what to do, what to say, and how to. And tradition says, our great mother supplies everything we need, but we have to take only what we need. And like my people used to fall undermine the roots of a tree, and by walking around it in a rainstorm and singing, and that would loosen the soil on it, and it would fall against the bank, and we'd make a canoe. Most of our canoes were made against the bank of a mountain because it's kind of awkward to explain. It's because it's up the side hill at an angle, and you start a fire on the bottom, and it'll burn all the way up, and it hollows out the tree out for you for nothing. So you essentially keep attending the fire there and burning it out until finally it gets deep enough, and then you can start working on it to shape the canoe with your tools. And the other usage was with with red cedar was that you would do the same thing, undermine what we used to call snags, that's split top cedars, and the canoes were made out of solid intact trees, whereas our houses were made out of what we used to call snags. They were split multi-topped cedars, and we would again walk around it and undermine its base, and it would fall over, and we would use the slabs off of it to make our houses. So acquisition of material was, you know, not as hard as people thought. Now, looking back, think it was. So that is the basis of our basic structures. And this yellow cedar we used all sorts of stuff up there, I suppose. But our lives weren't all that complicated anyway. We lived our lives around making things out of naturally occurring things, plants, roots, and that make our baskets and whatnot. So it wasn't a very difficult life for the coast people, because once when you got your basic structures built, I was talking to an anthropologist friend of mine up at UVic, and she did research on the hours of work that the average coastal Kwakwuzweth, they called us, wherever we called her, so Kwakiutl, West Coast Indians here, we worked 3 weeks a year after we got everything. So we had the life of Riley. We had our canoes. We had to learn to maintain our canoes. At numerous ways, and I didn't find that out until I was up Every Creek of all things. We get pitch from trees and glue the splits in our canoes together with that, mixed it with sand and poured in there, melted. Life was so easy. And so the philosophy of and the value system was centered around the simple transformation of naturally occurring things, making canoes out of, it was easy. So it wasn't as labor intensive as we thought. So that was men. And poor women, it would be a workhouse thing for women, from dawn till dusk every day. They have to look after the village, provide food, make all our implements and that. And the men would make big bowls and all that jazz for eating. So life was quite simple. And our residencies where we lived was quite simple, and it's kind of an awkward problem to only anthropologists can understand it, some of it, because all the ghost people from around Souk all the way up to Cayuga, one from one end of the island to the other, had 4 or 5 different dwellings, and the women were the bosses. They would say, "Okay, we can't find too much plant food here. Let's move up the coast a bit to our other camp, or up the river." And they would say, "Oh, this plant is starting to ripen up there. Let's go up there and live and get these plants, because I have to plug in my darn iPad."
No problem. No problem.
So life was really quite a bowl of cherries for the men, but the women would be busy picking berries, picking roots, picking everything all day. And the marriage system was even not noted too much. And my mother told me how it was, because she grew up in a village in the Barclay Sound up here, up till she was 12 when she was put in the boarding school. Yeah. So Mom told me that's the way they did it, because she remembers moving from camp to camp up till she was 12 or so. And then they all got put in the boarding school and buggered up our family structure. So that's essentially what the basic of our lives were. And that Mom said that we were a singing people. We'd get up in the morning, we'd have the good morning song. We'd even starting the fire, we had song for that, she said. Cooking, preparing food, the women would have their songs, and greeting people. There was an odd thing amongst my people, almost telepathic, I guess, because we had greeting songs for visitors coming to our village. And I was about 7 or 8. We were having a festivity at my dad's in-law aunt, sort of, Ada's place. And she was preparing food there. And then she says, "They're getting near the point." And we were in the harbor there, up from the beach in Leonard Jones' house. She says, "We have to go down to the beach now. They're just getting near the corner, near the point." And, like a dumb kid, we all just filed down, obedient to our parents. And then they got the drums out, and then, sure enough, around the point came when with the 4 or 5 canoes from Cahoose coming paddling in towards our village. So it was sort of an awkward thing to for me to remember, and that our communication system was almost sublime or something like that sometimes, but not all the time. And we're quite happy in the suitable culture that was developed for our what anthropologists call our economic system, or the way we live, our energy needs, and that was suitable to. And then I was attending a presentation by this guy. You ever hear the whole river studies? Well, anyway,
Whole River study from down in Washington State.
yeah, an anthropologist was giving his lecture on it, on his thesis, and he had wrote a book on his thesis, and he was giving a public presentation of it, and he told me that he chronicled the dig at the Whole River Cave there, 5,000 years, and he figured that the layer upon layer that built up there told what foods we were at. And the earliest ones were shorefish and shellfish and that, clams and whatnot. And that after a while, that was depleted, and they wound up using other resources a little further out, cod and that. That was in another layer. Then finally, when onset of the explorers came, we were using nets and traps in rivers too. Well, that was still utilized anyway, but that was more common. So the growth, the population pressure on the land providence was starting to force us to use different technologies to get other sources of food. And the big bragging thing was the macaw doing and the lapush doing whaling and that, which was likely true. However, my mom sort of agreed with them, but not quite, because she said that, from what I heard, when there was a whale wanting to come to us, they would everybody, a helter skelter bunch would pile into a canoe, and they would paddle out singing the whale song, and then they would circle around, wait for the whale, and the whale will swim to them, and then they will put a harpoon on it, and they would sing it to shore. She said it was a ritualistic thing that the whale told us when. So this was in Cahoose, in my immediate clan. So there's a lot of um, contradictory, unrecorded stuff that was sort of stuffed over, because the story about Mom telling about the whaling system in Cahoose and the male dominated system of used in Lapush and Macaw were sort of contradictory. Mom said that boys and women used to go out there paddling, and there would be one harpooner, but she said it's usually the biggest guy who could lift that big harpoon up, those heavy 4 or 5 inch thick U or something like that. So I can blab forever, I suppose, but meanwhile, we're talking about um, that's the basic structure of our people then, but that was all gone, and my people lost everything. There's no language. We're adopting rituals and practices from other people, and that we don't know our language anymore, and we're too lazy to learn it. It's it was sad, but that was what I feel is what I call the total victory of the Indian Act, where were totally destroyed the Pacheedaht First Nation culture, language, everything gone. Even our name, actually, what happened was the Pacheedaht First Nation was sort of a name given to the Indian agent by survivors of the plague. Grandpa told me, he said that what happened was the after the plague, they wound up in Port Renfrew. The Catholic priests came along and baptized all of us Indians, and so that was fine. And then the Indian agent came, and this all happened quite quickly. Grandpa said, and that the Indian agent came along, and he asked them, "What what's the name of your people?" And the problem, they didn't know. That's what Grandpa said. We were kids. I was 12, and the oldest in our surviving family was 14. And none of us knew the name of the village in Port Renfrew. And along come Joshua, who was about 8 years old. He, you're a kid, you don't care, So he didn't know. So they were looking, but Grandpa said they were sitting at the mouth of a little brook, and there was foam on it. Then somebody said, "Botcham, a botcham." That means hairs on woman. Botcham. I know what we are. Apachum or something like that. It means sea foam. And it actually, Mom said it started with B when we first heard it. Pacheedaht, Bachat. And so they talked over amongst themselves with the Indian agent sitting there, and he says, "What do you mean?" And then he said, Pacheedaht. Yeah, Pacheedaht. They were sea foam people. And that's how our name was given to us. And the Indian agent didn't care because there was all kids who survived the probably smallpox plague then. And I guess this was the second plague, apparently. Anyway, so that's how we wound up with the Pacheedaht First Nations name. And it's all have you ever studied cultural evolution in the world of let's pretend? Especially I found that out in my people, we invent a romantic folklore that this is what happened to us. We're people of the sea folk, we're the peaceful people. Well, actually, sort of. And that evolved, said that we were born on that island, and they made stories out of that. So we've been busy here, and I'm still busy now with the latest struggle. Thanks to, we all owe Joshua, our scout, our watchman, our observer.
Finding the information out there. Yeah. I remember him
Yeah,
telling me about going on the satellite images and finding these valleys and getting the
yeah,
information about, hey, this place is intact, it's untouched, it hasn't been logged. And I'm sure you, over the course of your lifetime, have seen
yes.
quite a lot of change in the forest. When you were a kid, the old
Oh,
growth must have been quite a bit of it left around where you grew up, right?
yeah, there was miles and miles of old growth, and it all was big stuff. It all was had 4 feet, 3 or 4 feet average,
Yeah.
all the way up to the sky, and mile after mile of that. I started off logging, and it was the 40s and 50s technology then, steam powered machinery, and you wouldn't believe it. Sailors evolved our systems of line management logging by being old sailors, and they devised the logging systems here, and there was about half a dozen or more different line, I guess you would call it spar tree logging.
Mhm.
Raise a tree, and that was the way when I first started in 1956,
Mhm.
and we didn't know any difference. You had to believe in this. This was it. You have no You have no preset thoughts of the civilization that you're in. This is just it.
Right.
Just like when you were in in your grade school, you know, you had no way of comparison. This was it. And that's the way it was with loggers.
Mhm.
We just grew up in a world of, you go logging. That's it,
Mhm.
And the culture was developed to be a logging town and stuff like that, which was very racist orientated, and uh, it was sort of brutal works, but a lot of it was brutal. The lowest, you started off the lowest on the totem pole, chokerman. You put this wire around a log, and then they hook it up to the line, and they pull it in, and that's essentially what it is. Then there's the machine operators and stuff like that. And my dad was successful that he was running tugboats mostly. So that was it. And he was sort of really scapegoated, and he had a tough time all his life because of the racism. So he'd come home grouchy. And in them days, it was 12-hour shifts. It worked 6 days a week for 12 hours. You got a day off. And then about 1950 changed to 8-hour day, and then five-day week when I started, 1956. So it was brutal. And then I was too skinny. I was 90 pounds, or no, it was 104 pounds when they weighed me to go into the logging camp, at the logging camp. And in 6 months, I gained, went up to 119 pounds, and I was so proud of myself. And so it was a challenge that we sort of lived up to. Actually, it was, looking back now, all the lowest people on the logging totem pole were young, 16, 18. We were, the brutal parts of the jobs were left to young greenhorns, they called us. Same in the States. Actually, logging systems were pretty well similar in the States, except that technology advanced faster in Washington State than in Canada. We started using steel towers in the mid-50s or something like that, and they didn't come till Canada till about the mid-60s. Anyway, so our racism was the basis of our oppression, I think. And Dad and Mom suffered from it after having our language and traditions destroyed in the boarding school. We were put in the workplace to do the menial jobs, Indians set the chokers, period. That was it. Or you push the logs around on the water, your boom in or whatever. So it was an oppressive life that when you grow up in it, you don't know the difference. You don't, you don't know the wage structure, and you don't know how much a faller is or how much a machine operator is. You only know your chokers. So, and usually you're never let to know. So unless you nose around, and then if you start digging into the facts of your life, you're branded a troublemaker. So it was an oppressive lifestyle, and even the loggers were sort of. Well, I was telling you about my first job, Bear Creek. There was put in the bunkhouse, 4 on one end, 4 on the other, with a stove in the middle, and it was about the size of a rail car. Well, anyway, there was German, Greek, Italian, I forget now, 4 or 5 groups fresh from Europe, and we were all 16, 18 years old. And they got to be friends with a Polish guy. And he was just learning to speak English. And he was trying to learn to speak English with me. So after work, I'd be busy in the bunkhouse there teaching all these young refugees English. And the first thing they wanted to know, you teach me to swear. You teach me to swear to you, Billy boy, you teach me to swear. And, well, okay. He said, look at him. And I say, you Greek plick. I say, you Greek prick. And then, and then I tell him, so he'd say that, you Greek plick. And then I say, you say to him, you wop asshole. I always remember that my lessons in English, that's the first lesson.
Little language self-defense, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
So, and it was a poignant time too, I think, at times, because we learned mobility, and I went to Vancouver, forgot what I was doing there. But anyway, I was at UBC. This is in 56 and 63. I was walking down the road in the UBC, and hey, Bill, huh? I turned around, and it was the Polish fella. He had no Hungarian. He was Hungarian. He had to run for it from the Hungarian Revolution when he was just 15 years old. He made it, and they were very brutal with the refugees in them days. They used them for basic labor, gun fodder in the economic cannons. So all the kids are stuff there. But anyway, he was from, I guess, a middle class up intellectual family, and he wound up going to university. And I says, oh, where have you been? He says, oh, I'm here now. She said, they kept me here because he was studying here, and they just kept him on. And that was in the 60s. So there was lots of poignant stories like that throughout my life.
No, it's really good to hear these stories, Mr. Jones, because it's the history of, your people and the changes that they went through. Like, it's happened so fast. You're talking about, 2 generations, the
Yeah,
changes from, your mom knowing the old stories and the old ways that, that she heard from her elders, I'm sure, and
yeah,
probably was
living.
raised in some of those ways, right? And that
Yeah,
all changed in 2 generations, basically. And
oh
now it's
yeah,
to the point where I read a recent article that you were interviewed for about the fact that some of the First Nations in the area have gotten into the logging business. That's not a new thing, but
yeah,
that change from the old ways of living there, living in those simple ways that you were talking about, making the canoes and the houses,
yeah,
and now you have outside corporations and some of the First Nations partnering with them to log these old growth.
yeah. That's right. We colonialized. We yeah. Actually, this is an old trick. Apparently, it happened in Kenya. I was told about it while studying in history book. The British, on their way out, they knew they were done there, so they were training a political elite to look after the British investment interests when they left. So they were paid well to run the shop for the English while they were in England, And so you wound up with the same race oppressors. So Kenyans were oppressing themselves. Well, it's sort of like that here now, but not as grave, because most of these logging companies are on the lowest echelon of the utilization of product. It's it's a logging company. They call it a JIPO. There's a small subcontracting outfit that's owned by actually 65% by Western Forest Products and 35% by the Ohio people. And so they're logging, and they give, fairly good wages, but not a substantial wage. You don't pay a slave enough to make him think he's like you. You have to keep him down. That's my thought.
Yeah.
How to oppress people, I think. Maybe I suppose I could say I have an understanding of the colonialist system, but on the other hand, that's the way the whole world operated from when first empires started evolving. and they didn't mess around as well like oh boy, the early, who was a Genghis Khan, and them, they wiped out people, and the European warriors wiped out civilizations, and finally the Romans evolved, or was it the Greeks? Greeks came first, I guess, and they were oddly different from the Romans. The Greeks didn't destroy civilizations. They just went there and said, okay, you pay us a cut, and then we'll let you continue on. But the Romans, they were a little bit different. One of my teachers, Greenhouse, his name was, he said that, Bill, in history, the Romans have been known to wipe out 25 full civilizations, and that they killed every person of that culture, and that they're gone and wiped out forever. And he told me, he said that even in England, I think he said there was 25 different dialects when the Romans came along, and then the Romans sort of civilized England, and I don't know what they spoke, Roman, I guess, and they whittled it down to 9 languages, 9 cultures that were dominant and survived the Roman era. So the oppressive system is old, and I think that's a problem with people who want to think, but that is a problem too, because our thought systems are all educationally controlled. You go to university, you think like a University of Washington dude, or Harvard, or or even Deep South, Old Miss. And you have that mindset. Once when they're entrenched in you, you know, it's very difficult to change. I don't think it's changeable unless over generations or war. And so I blab my way into corners a lot of the time.
I understand. No, I appreciate it. I think you're right. This history is old of some societies becoming so warlike from a conquering perspective. Let's go out and take somebody else's land and conquer their resources, and then assimilate them. The boarding schools you talked about earlier, the whole kill the Indian, save the man that they talked about, here in the United States with the Carlisle school. And it's a deliberate process of destroying the old ways, and we're going to assimilate you, through force and through war and through violence, but also through, like you just said, education and media and school and all these different things into the new way of thinking, which is, an extractive way. Let's profit from these trees. Let's cut down as many as we can, right? Rather than just what we need.
Yeah, that's the olden days, pre-colonial times.
So, Bill, I'd love to ask you briefly about the new blockade. So Ferry Creek, the original Ferry Creek situation is over now, but there's this new blockade that started this summer in August in the Walbran to defend some old forests up there. So could you tell us a little bit about what's happening up there and what it's like? You've been up there, I assume. This is close to your home.
Yeah, it's way out in the Tules, right in the middle of literally nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's just as far to any village in any direction, Port Renfrew or Nitnat or Lake Cowichan. It's right smack dab in the middle, in very pretty rough roads, all gravel. And so it's not accessible as it was in Renfrew. And I think that's a problem. Location is its isolation is its drawback, and so it's more difficult for kids to get up there. They have to stand on the road and hitchhike. Most of the kids usually don't have a car or have a very dilapidate jalopy, the olden day talk. And so it's a pondersome situation there. And Will, you probably know Will, or through Joshua, heard of Will O'Connell, yeah. And he's up there, and Celine, something the other, French girl, and they're sort of organizing and providing and soliciting funds to keep it running. It's here, see the bright light flash here? This is fire drill practice. They said you don't have to do anything. Just sit in your room. They're testing the fire drill system. And the door is locked, so I can't go out. Well, you can open the door, but you have to pull real hard on it. Anyway, where was I before? With Will and
Yeah.
and the Providence. No, that was fine. It all started off quite nicely up there, except that what happened was a homeless First Nations woman went up there. Her name was, she calls herself, what the heck is it? Anyway, she has two names, and she wanted to take over, but she was very argumentative, and she didn't have, she's a Cree from way out somewhere, and didn't develop communication skills to interact with white people. So she got there with her small group, and they wanted to be boss, and they wanted to take over the camp and run it in her way, And most of the kids that are up there, like even me, I ain't much of an Indian or custom and traditions or songs or anything, but I do know that our connection is basic, subliminal, and that it's the forest. But she doesn't have that. And so she doesn't have the same intimacy that the whites have developed there. The land defenders have developed this. They became Aboriginal. They became, one voice at the conclusion of one of the talks that I gave at what they called then Salmon Camp. He stood up and he says, I know what we're doing here. We are re-indigenizing ourselves. And there's, I don't know, 150, 200 people around him, and they all gaped at each other, and we all realized that, yeah, that probably is it. My thoughts didn't exactly say that, but I, my soul accepted his statement. I sort of understand that girl who was hell bent on. Well, she wasn't really hoping to destroy the camp, but I think she was willing to take over at all cost. But she doesn't have interracial communication skills, especially with upper middle class white people who cough up the money to run the joint. Whereas myself, all my life, I have been not quite rubbing elbows or having good associations with white people, but I was given an understanding of how steep this world is and how you have to develop a communication skill to address and talk to them. And like myself now, in as much as I have been a normal Indian, I was given the lessons and thoughts, but they didn't coalesce in me until I was up Perry Creek. So, but uh, Logan, her name is, she's the kingpin in that First Nations movie, and she's maybe sort of mentally ill, but I think she's just angry. It's sort of like there was this podcast or something. This guy was on YouTube, and he was explaining how he evolved into being a Republican, and he said he was driven by his dissatisfaction and anger with the world around him, and he wound up sort of in the blame game, and he wound up blaming the Democrats, And now it has been a blame game all through along for uh, they did it. Those are the dirty rats, and that's what Logan developed, and it's very difficult. He said now with Trump going crazy, I realized that he said it. It was greed and selfish. It was mostly selfishness that drove me to the right and to make a living. He was working fast, so he sort of gave me a feeling of the dissatisfaction with a lot of people in the States, much like Logan. That is another aspect of Moa. I think he had little red books on insurrection and all that shit.
Mao, yeah.
And I sort of glanced through it and it didn't fizz in, but I realized that that's what actually a psychiatrist said that too. He said, you don't have to understand what's the matter with you. You just got to. He's a tapist guy. He gave a ritual to his clients, and he did tapping his head, face, and he said, I deeply and truly don't. As I learn to love myself, I don't know what's the matter with here, but I got hurt over here, and I accept it and love it. And that therapy, I think, is effective. But like all therapies, they don't cure you. And I think that is a problem with mankind. We have a selfishness, ego on one side, and the truth on the other. And how to balance that is a dicey game because men are very good at that. I wanted to throw in this thought that one of my favorite historians currently is a guy named Casagrande, and he does talks on pods and whatnot. He went through the evolution of First Nations civilization from South and Central America. They started off in Peru, northern Chile, and they immigrated up. And he said that they were learning how to utilize and farm. And my thinking is, I bet I know who taught them. Their wives. Okay, so they got good at it. Then they got healthy and tough. Then they got that strut, and that strut is the death of man's own civilization, and it gets carried away in greed. And they got to, of all places, where the Mayans lived, and they collapsed and died because of climate change and their own greed. They started killing all the Indians around there, and then they collapsed. That civilization disappeared. And then another group came along, forgot what it is. I never remembered all these names anyway. And they did the same thing. And then Cortez or whoever he is, that Spanish destroyer, that's a good mistake.
Hey, yeah, conquistador, same thing.
Yeah. And he wound up in near Mexico on the coast there. And he heard that there was a big civilization over there in Mexico. He didn't know what to call it, and it turns out that's not their name. But anyway, he got there, and he said Casagrande said that inasmuch as Cortez sensed that they were fighting each other because they were developed the maximum food supply pressure on that lake in Mexico City, and other people wanted to take it over, and they had to fight for it. So they wound up at war with each other, and they were already starting to deteriorate before their population pressure. As the population pressure got up, and they were in the self-destruct phase, early stages of it, and that Cortez just capitalized on it.
it reminds me of, to bring the conversation full circle in some ways. I've got a friend of mine, Josephine Dick, who's Northern Paiute. She's an elder. We were sitting out on the fire one day at our protest camp up there back in 2021, just sitting around talking, and we were talking about the old ways of her people in that area, which there's not much trees around them, but their old food source was the pine nuts and jackrabbits and mule deer, and they were out, and seeds from the different grasses. They were out in sagebrush, Great Basin desert sagebrush country. And she said to me, one day all this modern stuff that we rely on now is going to be gone. We're not going to have it anymore. And so that's why she said, that's why I'm out here defending this mountain that the company wanted to destroy for mining, is because she said one day my grandchildren or great-grandchildren or great-great-grandchildren are going to have to rely on this mountain for their food, for their water, for everything. Because when these complex ways that we have now in this civilization fall apart, which they always do, then people will go back to the simpler ways, because that's what you can really rely on. But you can't rely on it if you've poisoned the water and you've blown up the mountain and you've cut down all the forests. So it's short-sighted extraction.
Yeah, very much so. And take. That's our mankind's biggest. It's curious because there was a few places that grew into larger populations in around Vancouver Island, like housed people, but they had sort of a large center of population, and they were evolving, and they were doing quite well because there was still enough protein around to feed oceans of fish. They were evolving, and I think they were population growth. So I think all populations depend on something to eat, nutrition, and that, like you say, the Paiutes and that are know that they have to plan. There's an odd thing about Washington State. I was trying to help in Port Renfrew, and they were going to put a garbage dump in Sombrio, 2/3 way to Port Renfrew, and I was phoning around, then community planning and stuff like that. And so I nosed around, and I wound up phoning these young people in Washington State government, and this young woman said, in Canada, the developers didn't do what we did in Washington State. They didn't develop good roads first. And I guess they understood the Romans. You got to get there if you're going to be boss. And so she said that the government always has been concentrating on making good accessible roads, but like any other growing city, garbage is our main concern now. And so that's how I wound up with talking to her, and how the Highway 101, 99 were all built before the villages even got there, thought of, and they made it straight through virgin forest, stuff like that. And there's remnants of it, like Forks, remnants of the preparation days.
Well, let's just get up to the present day with the camp that's up in the Walbrand. So a court granted an injunction to the logging company in September. And then a couple weeks ago, on November 25th, the RCMP raided the camp. And I believe they arrested a number of people. The camp rebuilt, and people are still out there. From what I understand, there's currently somebody hanging from a platform off the side of a bridge, blocking one of the roads up there. And I think December 2nd was the 100th day of the blockade. So I know they're calling for people to come out and support them in person at the camp if they can be there, if they can get out there. I know you said it's in a remote area, but I know there also are people supporting in many other different ways by donating or making phone calls to politicians or writing and raising awareness of these issues in the media. Do you have any message for people who want to support or get involved in this?
Yeah, yeah. I had quite a turnout on what I said on pleading for support, put on Facebook and Instagram, I think it was. And I was told my post attracted 4.5 million viewers. Holy cow. So I feel rather guilty about that because I'm sort of like an unqualified influence, but no known, I'm not a forester. I'm not an ecologist. I'm an engine. Like maybe the Paiute people up there, they likely didn't study ecology or desert stuff.
Yeah, but sometimes the people who've been to too much school, they think they know more than they actually do. Speaking of ego, speaking of arrogance, like you were talking about so much here, sometimes I think it takes people who are humble and, like you just grew up in a place and were told by your elders, this is the way to be, this is the way to live in this place, because that's how we used to do it and it worked for a long time. It doesn't take a PhD to see what's going wrong up there.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
The pillaging, the utter death. I was so hurt there when a poignant, sort of sweet, sad thing I saw on, I guess, Facebook or something. Will and them posted the damage to creeks, and I think 4 or 6 kilometers down from the current logging site, they photographed these salmon fry swimming in packed debris of branches and crap coming down from what little they already fell up there. And I was thinking they only logged up, or they only fell about probably at least less than half, less than a quarter of what they're going to fall down, and all that debris is going to and kill all them fry. Sheesh, we are rather stupid, and yet I'm so touched by, not quite touched by, but I know greedy Indians, like greedy white people. A man just becomes greedy because that's the way he grew up, to be selfish. And I think all those boys are like that man explaining why he became now he's having lots of druthers about being a Republican. He's trying to explain his way out of his understanding of how he can comfort and find a different choice. And I think those people, the First Nations logging too, are doing that. They're going backwards. Let's start off from 2012. All the engines on my reserve were all gung-ho. Yeah, we're going to save the Gold Coast. We all went down to the foot of Walbrand at that last bridge before the park, and we were having camp there. And it was so sort of doubtfully hopeful for me. They want to save it. They want to quit it. It's sort of coercion is a very subtle game. Jeffrey, our main crook, oh boy, should I gossip to you or should I not say it? Well, okay. We were at a community lunch in Renfrew, and we had nothing to do before the lunch. And Jeff invited people out to look at this dirigible, or whatever they call it, the balloon craft, ocean craft. And we were all leaning over it. And he was explaining this and that, and go up the river at the air. What do they call that?
Craft, is that it?
Sort of how you spat water down and it shoots up and bad for a bad jet boat, yeah. And then they were leaning over, and then one of his friends said, where's your yacht now? Where's your sailboat? And he said, and Jeff said, oh, it's in Fiji. And his friend said, Jerry said to Jeff, how'd you get it there? Did you sail it? Nah, we shipped it. A 40-foot yacht, and it was in Barbados or someplace down there in an English-speaking colony down there on the east in the Caribbean. Anyway, they shipped from there to, and I was thinking, holy fuck. Years later, now the Canadian tax money paid for Jeff and Helen's yacht that they bought down there after selling the land that they bought there. And then they got tired of it was getting too populated in wherever they stayed in their holidays, and they shipped it all to Fiji. And I was thinking, Jesus, a live aboard 40-foot yacht, all supplied by the Canadian government, shipped by the Canadian government, anchored by the Canadian government. And I cried the blues to a retired corporate lawyer here. You may one day meet him. And he said to me, Bill, he says, came right from a corporate lawyer. He says, this money to keep people happy is peanuts, he said. In other words, it's just loose change to the profits that the corporations make in their, much like there's in southeastern BC, just close to Washington State or something like that, there's a proposed copper mine from these Indians on the lake there. A lawyer friend of mine said he's doing the assessment and whatnot for the Indians. And he said that the company offered them $3 million. And, as any other lawyer shrugged, say, well, what's your proposed profit? And they said, about 95 billion. And I scratched, said, what percentage of 95 billion is $3 million? And I think it's about 0.03 or 0.003% of that. So the overhead of corrupting people is throw the dog a bone, And so that's why I'm so sort of not quite appalled at this world, but realizing the scope of it. And I've actually been given good insight to it, but it didn't fizz into me. I was a nice kid. I was 19 years old, looking for spiritual guidance and all that shit that a 19-year-old does. And I was drinking, get drunk, go to church and that. And then I wound up in the Young People's Union of a United Church in Canada here. And they said, oh, you have to go to the other church. They got a big one. We only have 4 or 5 here. Okay, I went up there. And we became friends. And I was lying on the lawn, 3 of us, Prentice Bodell, an American guy, Bob Boyles, Prentice Bodell was Forrest. And I was lying there like this. And Bob said to Prentice, what plane are we going to use tonight? And Prentice offhand said, I guess we have to use the Twin Beach. And Bob replied, yeah, we have to be back by 11 anyway, so I guess we have to use that. And Mr. Dumbo Bill said, well, how many planes do you have anyway, Prentice? And he said, Dad, hello there. Am I in trouble?
I'm just going to take a look at your sink.
How's that?
I'm going to reseal your sink.
Okay, thanks. Okay, June. Anyway, it wasn't for years. I didn't realize how steep this world was, but I was given a experience in the very unfathomable mountain that we have to climb to get in with the rich. And I was an orderly looking after his retired brigadier general, and I was bitching and complaining, I forget what as a drunk is, and I was bad. No, what's the matter, Bill? What are you mad about? Grumble, 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 grumble. I don't know what I was mad about, and told him to, and he said, Bill, you're on the bottom. I'm on the top. My family has been on top for 800 years, and we're not letting it go, he said. So be happy, he told me. That didn't sink in until, lately. So that is why I have a retirement understanding of how gargantuan the rich people's profits were, and still are.
I guess we can wrap up, Mr. Jones. I thank you for taking the time, and I appreciate you telling the stories. We've got a lot. We've got a long way to go, and you're right about that.
I'll
Like
see.
the amount of ideology and the way people's thinking is wrapped up in that greed and ego and position, social status. It's going to be hard to overcome, but I think it's so important that we work for it, and that we make the stands and stand up, especially for those places like the Wall Brand, like Fairy Creek,
Oh, yeah.
that are
Yeah.
irreplaceable unless you wait thousands of years, and even then you're not going to get what was there before.
Yeah, that's so true. Sweet, sad, sort of. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and hopefully I'll see you up there at some point. I haven't been able to make it up to the camps, but at some point I hope to get across the border and come up and meet you in person and meet everyone else who I haven't been able to yet, and do a little bit of a contribution in person to what's happening up there. So thank you.
Thank you, Max. And I'll be keeping an eye out for you.
Okay. Take care.
And call me anytime you want. Before I might not cry the blues as much as I am.
I understand. Okay. Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Thanks. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too. Thanks.
I want to thank you for listening to our show and let you know a few ways you can support Truth and Reckoning. First, share this broadcast with your friends and family. Leave a positive review via your podcast app. Visit the Truth and Reckoning YouTube channel and leave a thumbs up and a comment. The full scope of the work of CELDF, including this show, comes with a financial cost. So if you're able to make a donation, go to CELDF.org. That's CELDF.org. But most importantly, our goal for this show is to empower you to take action. So the best way you can show your support is to get involved with your community and protecting the place where you live. Thank you very much.